Hi, Alistair. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I missed some of the last speaker's words because of the technical issues. So if I'm repeating something, excuse me for that. Alistair, I just want to say first, when you hear about the families, many of us here are parents. And when you hear about families deciding that putting a 5-year-old in a boat and hope for the best, they will have a better life in another country in Europe. Can you imagine how desperate that is? Can you imagine what it takes as a parent to actually do that? Then you really don't have many other choices. I just wanted to start this by trying to expel 3 myths about refugees. First and foremost, nobody wants to become a refugee. Refugees are people who are forced to flee their homes. They leave their belongings behind, their friends, their family, because they're forced to do so. That could be because of climate change, that can be because of an armed conflict, or simply because they have no livelihood opportunities anymore. I think climate change is actually the biggest driver of displacements today. The second myth is really that refugees aren't coming to Europe and the United States because they have seen how fantastic lives we have. Most refugees would prefer to stay where they are, where they're born and raised. They would prefer to have an opportunity to live their lives there. That's where they see a familiar culture. That's where they speak the language. That's where they can get the food they like and live in the climate they like. And refugees would typically seek opportunities in neighboring countries first. And when they don't find it, they go to the next country and go to the next country. And then some of them will end up on the beaches of Libya and trying to get into a boat. But it's not their preferred way. Third myth is that refugees are not simple benefit seekers. They're often projected as such, but refugees are just looking to get a new start in life because of what I just said. They're looking to get a job, have a chance to feed their family and to live in peace and to regain their dignity because they haven't been able to do where they come from. It's quite a challenge. It's very admirable when you think about it, how people are able to do that through a process where they get very traumatized. So let's see, what is the international community doing? Well, we heard a lot about what's being done, but sometimes you feel that the majority of time and energy is really spent on preventing refugees from entering our countries, more than the effort spent on integrating them. We build border walls, we arrange for different early detection systems, we finance camps in North Africa to prevent them from crossing the Mediterranean. And that's those who are not only died on their way through the Sahara, because more people die getting through the Sahara Desert than the ones coming across the Mediterranean. So I believe this should be a government responsibility, and I think the EU should take a much bigger part of responsibility for these forcibly displaced people. And we should expect some solidarity across the EU countries, and I don't think we have seen much of that. It's everyone is trying to find the best solution for themselves instead of going into this with the solidarity and share the burden. Because I thought that was EU was designed to do, solidarity across Europe. So instead, I feel that most countries are trying to just protect their borders. And that means that countries like Greece, Italy, and Turkey end up becoming the countries forced to carry the largest burden simply because of their geographic position. And we heard a minister explain that in detail. If you go to Turkey, you can see that Turkey currently hosts about 4 million refugees. They're all supported by the government. They all have access to the national healthcare system. A huge burden on national budgets in Turkey, of course. And this is partly financially supported by the EU, but not even close to what it really costs the country. Take another example, Jordan. Jordan hosts 1 million refugees. 1 million refugees live in Jordan on a total population of only 8 million people. That's a huge challenge. I don't think we have a refugee problem in Europe and North America. We just have an integration challenge. Take a look at Canada. Canada welcomes increasingly more refugee families. They say they need the manpower, they need the people to come and work there. They have a unique approach to integration. Typically, a number of Canadian families commit to actually take responsibility for the secure integration of a refugee family in society, and it really works. If you go to Europe and the United States, we need the labor too. I mean, we have fertility rates at an all-time low, and we need to figure out who's going to do the jobs in the future. We need a labor. We need to find better ways to give refugees a new start. Let me give you an example. My company, the company behind my foundation, the IKEA company, established a few years ago a refugee internship program. They give refugees across Europe and the United States a 6 months internship opportunity to combine with language courses and some cultural training. And that's that's the start a refugee needs to start becoming integrated in another country. When they're done with the internship, they can apply for jobs at IKEA or in other companies. And this is something that any company can do in Europe. If we would all put our minds to trying to do something similar, we wouldn't have a problem. It's not expensive to do, and there are many mutual benefits for both refugees and for the companies embarking on such a program. So we really need to change the narrative on refugees. Refugees are not criminals or benefit seekers. They're rather people who've been forced to leave their homes. They're looking for a new start in life. I would actually say that refugees are people like you and me. We should not forget that. And we talked about children, and children are really the ones worst impacted by displacements. Thousands of unaccompanied refugee children arrive in Southern Europe with no family, nowhere to go, and no future prospects. They're highly vulnerable, of course. They're easily exposed to exploitation, often severely traumatized from the awful experience they had traveling the long way from their country to Europe. So that's why we collaborate with the Home Project in Athens, which has helped hundreds of unaccompanied refugee children process this trauma and get back into school, build a personal plan for a future, and a plan for how to either be resettled in another European country or be integrated into society. This is not easy work. These kids are very challenging kids, but they deserve a chance. I think this should be a government responsibility. The EU should take responsibility for these children. It's not Greece's responsibility alone just because they happen to come to Greece. But instead of that, the Home Project is largely dependent on private funders like us. Having said that, many children never get to benefit from such an opportunity as they can get in the Home Project because the Home Project has limited capacity. Many are forced to live on the streets. But this needs to change. Children are our future. They really deserve better than this. So at the IKEA Foundation, we're focused on improving the lives of children and families living in vulnerable communities. Refugee children are probably the most vulnerable of all. And Sophia will talk more about this, I think. Let me broaden the perspective just a little bit before I close and say that the majority of the world's 82 million displaced people are hosted in neighboring countries. They're not hosted in Europe or North America. They're hosted in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, in low and middle income countries. And these countries need a lot of help to actually be the host of millions of refugees. And the international community is doing a big job, especially through organizations like IOM, UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees. They're doing a great job in supporting these host countries, but it's not enough. And what I believe is that in those countries, just as we do in Europe, we need to pivot towards what we call refugee self-reliance. Go from a policy of putting people in camps towards a policy of integrating refugees. That means giving refugees the right to work, the right to free movement, the right to have access to government services as every other citizen gets, and have basically the opportunity to contribute to society. We know that a refugee is in a camp for an average of 20 years. What a waste of time. You should make them productive, make them self-reliant, and help restore their dignity, because they're there because they didn't have a choice. So IKEA Foundation works to make refugees self-reliant, both in rural and urban communities. But our work happens far away from Europe. And we have evidence that proper integration can work well for everyone. It works well for refugees and it works well for the host community if it's done in the right way. They can collaborate and live in peace with each other. Of course, when we talk about the pandemic was, as many of you know, first and foremost, a livelihood challenge for all those living in vulnerable communities, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. They couldn't continue their work in the informal economy, and therefore they couldn't make the necessary money to feed their family. And this situation, of course, became even more challenging for the refugees because they're even less looked after. Furthermore, there's been a further decrease in asylum space due to border closures, and in particular when refugees and asylum seekers have been falsely targeted as the super spreaders of COVID-19. You know, it's always easier to blame any problems on refugees, right? Young refugees all over the world have lost education opportunities as well because school closed. So refugees are impacted like all of us. So let me just close by saying that given the rapid population growth in sub-Saharan Africa, combined with the increased displacement due to conflict and climate change, the world has really no choice, the way I look at it. We must invest in these countries. We must create jobs. We must support entrepreneurs to enable people to make a living and raise a family where they were born and raised, because that's their preference. That's the preferred solution for most of them. And if we think we can simply stop migration by building walls, then we haven't really understood the root cause of migration.